A handful of people are running through a forest at night, and the forest is the strangest thing in the scene, not the wolves. The wolves are bad, and we will get to them. The forest is stranger, because this is Arrakis. This is the planet where water was so scarce that the dead were rendered for their moisture, where a man weeping at a funeral was making an extravagant and slightly shocking gift to the corpse, where an entire civilization organized its manners, its religion, and its murders around the arithmetic of not having enough to drink. There were no trees on Arrakis. There was no rain. And now there is a forest. And a few hundred kilometers away, there is a river with a high bridge over it, and the desert that made the Fremen has been reduced to one managed strip of sand kept alive the way a wealthy country keeps a national park. Somebody did that deliberately. That is the part worth sitting with. The greening of Arrakis was not an accident of terraforming that got out of hand. It was policy, executed patiently across 35 centuries by a single continuous ruler who is still alive and still ruling, and who is at this moment hunting the people in the forest. They are rebels, and they have just robbed him. The fortress they robbed is the Citadel, and it sits in the Sarir, which is the last piece of real desert left on the planet. It is not a palace in any sense that would be recognized by the courts of the first novel. There is no throne room full of petitioners, no rival house maneuvering down the corridor, no assassins in the ventilation. It is closer to a bunker built by somebody who has run out of things to be afraid of, staffed by an army that worships him, and administered by one exhausted man, and the most heavily protected object inside it is a written record. What the rebels took out of it is a sealed packet. Part of it is a set of plans to the Citadel itself, which is the practical half and the half they thought they were there for. The other part is the thing that matters, and it is the reason a book 500 pages long exists at all. They stole copies of his private journals, printed on Redulian crystal paper, the material that survives more or less forever. The rebels want them because they believe the journals will point to where he keeps his hoard of melange, the spice which he has monopolized so completely that controlling it is the same thing as controlling every human being alive. That is the plan. Steal the diary, find the warehouse, break the monopoly, end the tyranny. They are running because the fortress noticed. The things chasing them through the trees are called D-wolves, and they are not wild animals that happen to live in the forest. They were bred and placed there for exactly this purpose, which is to make the forest a wall. Anyone crossing the Emperor's ground at night meets them. They are large, they hunt in a pack, they are faster over distance than a human being, and they have been selected for a long time to be very good at precisely this. The group does not survive it. A man named Ulat is caught first. He is not the fastest, and the wolves are efficient, and he goes down somewhere behind the others in the dark, and that is the end of him. Then, a man named Kutag does the arithmetic that people in this situation sometimes do, works out that the pack is going to take all of them one at a time unless something slows it and stops running. He turns around to meet the wolves so that the fastest runner in the group gets a head start. It works. It costs him everything, and it works. The fastest runner is a young woman, and she gets out of the forest alive, carrying the stolen packet. Her name is Moneo Atreides, which is the third strange thing in this scene, and by some distance the most important. Because the man whose fortress she just robbed, whose wolves just killed her friends, whose empire she has spent years trying to bring down, is also her direct ancestor. She is an Atreides. He is an Atreides. The family is still running the universe the way it has been for 3,500 years, because the same person has been sitting on the throne for all 3,500 of them. His name is Leto II. He is the son of Paul Atreides, the boy from the first novel, the one who took Arrakis and became emperor and set off a holy war that killed billions. Paul has been dead for millennia. His son is not dead and shows no particular sign of ever becoming dead. And whatever else Leto II is, and there is a great deal to say about what he is no longer meaningfully a human being. He is about 7 meters long. He weighs something in the region of 5 tons. He is a sandworm with a man's face set in the front of it. So that is the situation at the opening of the 4th Dune novel. A worm rules the universe. The desert planet has a forest. The Fremen are a museum exhibit. And a young woman with the Emperor's own blood in her has just stolen his diary and watched two friends die for it. Here is the thing that makes all of it into a story rather than a setting. He knew, not in the general sense that a competent ruler expects his enemies to try things. Leto II can see the future. Not in flashes, not in riddles, not the way a fortune teller sees the future. Continuously, in detail, across the branching probabilities. And he has been doing it without interruption for 3,500 years. He knew about the raid. He knew the route they would take through the trees. He knew the wolves were there because he put the wolves there. He knew who would die and roughly where. He let it happen. He let Siona get away with the journals, specifically, and he let the other two die. And that is the question the whole novel is built around. So it is worth stating plainly now, because everything else in this story is downstream of it. Leto II spent 35 centuries constructing the exact machine that would eventually kill him. He built the road he died on. He wrote the standing order that would be used to murder him. He selected, bred, and trained his own assassin across 100 generations of his own family. And then he arranged for her to be in the right place at the right moment with the right weapon in reach. What did he see that was worth doing that? Because he does have a reason. That is the part people miss when they summarize this book as the one where Dune goes weird. Leto is not insane, he is not corrupted by power, and he is not lying about his motives. Within the terms of the novel, he is straightforwardly correct about everything he claims. He saw something coming for the human species. He worked out the only route around it. The route required a tyranny of a very particular kind, running for a very particular length of time, ending in a very particular way, and he has been executing it with total precision since before any nation on Earth existed. The route is called the Golden Path. We are going to spend a long time on what is actually in it, and I am deliberately not going to tell you yet, because the novel does not tell you yet. Herbert withholds the content of that vision for hundreds of pages and reveals it at the moment one specific character finally sees it for herself. That structure is not an accident, and it is not a tease. The whole argument of the book depends on you being made to wait, the way everyone in the story has been made to wait, while a creature that cannot be argued with insists that the suffering is necessary and declines to show anyone the receipts. For now, hold two facts side by side. Leto II has been the absolute ruler of every human being alive for 3,500 years. And the single thing he wants most in the universe is for that to end. Siona got out of the forest. The wolves went back to their runs. And in the Citadel, on a cart built for him by the Ixians, because he has not been able to walk in a very long time, the God Emperor of the known universe made a note about how well she ran. It is worth being precise about what is on that cart, because almost everything about Leto II gets flattened in the retelling, and the specifics are better than the summary. Start with the body, since it is the thing everyone remembers, and almost nobody remembers accurately. He is not a man who turned into a worm. He's a man wearing a skin made of several million individual living animals, and the distinction matters enormously for how he dies. The animal is called sandtrout. On Arrakis, sandworms have a larval stage, and the larvae are small, leathery creatures whose biological function is to find water and encysst it, sealing it away underground, which is how a planet becomes and stays a desert in the first place. Sandtrout are the reason Arrakis was dry. As a child, Leto covered himself in them. They fused to his skin, they kept fusing, and over the following centuries, the relationship stopped being a covering and became a merger. The sandtrout feed him, in the sense that they process spice and sunlight and keep the whole arrangement running. They armor him, and the armor is genuinely extraordinary. A blade will not go through it. Poison does nothing. He heals from injuries that would kill anything else. He has been shot at for 3,500 years by people considerably more competent than Siona's rebels, and it has never come close to working. They also age him at a rate that is essentially zero, which is why he is still here. What they have done to the shape of him is harder reading. The human parts have been receding for centuries, and the process is one way. His legs went first, absorbed into the length of the body. So the notion of Leto standing up is thousands of years out of date. His arms are still there, and they are the detail that tends to land hardest, because they have shrunk to something small and soft against the ribbed gray bulk behind them, hands that look like a child's hands, attached to 5 tons of worm. His face is still a face. It is still recognizably the face of the Atreides family, still Paul's son, set in a fleshy cowl at the front end of the creature, and it is still capable of every expression a human face makes. That is the horror of the design. There is a man's face on it, and the face is doing exactly what a man's face does. The transformation is also not finished, and he knows it, and this is the quiet terror running under his entire reign. The worm is winning, slowly, across centuries. More of him is becoming animal, and less of him is remaining Leto. He can feel it happening. He estimates, correctly, that he has a few thousand years left before there is nothing left of the person, at which point the thing on the cart continues to exist and continues to rule and is no longer anybody. He is watching himself dissolve at a rate of a few % per millennium, and there is nothing to be done about it. There is one exception to the invulnerability, and Herbert plants it early and casually. The way you plant something, you intend to detonate 500 pages later. Water. Sandtrout encyst water. Water is what they are built to hunt and seal away, and free water in contact with them is not a nuisance. It is a solvent. It kills them, and it kills them painfully, and Leto is made of them. He cannot swim. He cannot stand rain. A serious quantity of water landing on the God Emperor of the known universe does not inconvenience him. It takes him apart. Every other weapon in the universe is useless against him. The most common substance in the universe will dissolve him alive. He has built a river into his empire and named it after a friend. Hold on to that. Then there is what he gave up to get here, which is more than the walking. He cannot eat in any sense that would be recognized as eating. He cannot drink. He has no sex and no capacity for it, the relevant biology having stopped existing many centuries ago. And he was a young man once and remembers perfectly well what that was like. He cannot be touched with any pleasure. Most of the ordinary transactions between a body and the world have simply been closed to him, one after another, and he has kept a precise inventory of every one of them. And then there is what is inside his head, which is the part that makes the physical situation look almost manageable by comparison. Leto is not alone in there. He has never been alone in there, not for a single second of 3,500 years. The Atreides children in this series are what the Bene Gesserit call preborn, which means that they woke up conscious before they were born, with the full memories of their ancestors already loaded and running. Not inherited instincts, not vague racial memory. Individual people with their individual lives, their individual skills, and their individual opinions, awake and available and capable of talking back. Leto has his father in there. He has his grandfather. He has the whole Atreides line. And behind them, the maternal lines, the Bene Gesserit spent 90 generations assembling. And behind those, a crowd that runs back into prehistory until it stops being a list of names and becomes a mob. The practical upside is absurd. He can consult a Roman engineer about aqueducts and get an answer from someone who built one. He can ask a dead general how a particular kind of siege actually felt from inside the walls. Every language, every craft, every political disaster of the human record is available to him as testimony rather than history, which is why he is the only honest historian alive and knows it. He watched most of it. Somebody in him did. The downside is that all of them want to talk, and some of them want more than that. The specific failure mode has a name in this universe, abomination, and the novels had already shown exactly what it looks like. Leto's aunt Alia was preborn too, and the crowd inside her eventually found a personality strong enough to take the wheel. And the one who took it was her own maternal grandfather, Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, the single most malignant human being in the first novel. She lost. She was ridden by him for years, and it destroyed her, and it ended the way that sort of thing has to end. So the Ancestral Crowd is not a research library that Leto happens to own. It is a permanent low-grade siege, and holding the line against it is a job he has been doing every hour of every day since childhood, without one night off. He has the Baron in him too. He simply never lost. Now put the prescience on top of that. This is the piece that most people underrate, because the word oracle carries the wrong picture. Leto does not receive occasional cryptic visions. He has continuous, detailed, multi-channel awareness of the probable future, running all the time, the way other people have peripheral vision. He knows what a petitioner will say before the man opens his mouth. He knows which of his priests are plotting and roughly how the plot resolves. He has read the next several centuries the way somebody else reads a timetable, and he read them a long time ago, and nothing much has surprised him since. Herbert is completely explicit that this is a catastrophe rather than a gift, and the argument is worth following carefully because the entire novel rests on it. If you can see every outcome of every available choice, you never experience choosing anything. You look ahead, you identify which branch produces the result you want, and you walk down it. There is no deliberation in that, no risk, no moment of not knowing. There is only compliance with information you already have. Leto's whole reign, every decree, every execution, every century of enforced calm, is the recitation of a text he finished reading before he started. Whew. He is the least free being in his empire, and he is the one who built the empire. He has also lost surprise, permanently. And it turns out that surprise was doing more work in a human life than anyone notices while they still have it. Nothing can delight him because nothing can arrive. Nothing can frighten him. Nothing can be discovered. Every conversation he has is one he has already had in advance, alone in his head. 3,500 years of that is a length of time it is genuinely difficult to hold in mind, and it explains almost every strange thing he does, including the cruelty, including the theater, including the extremely dry sense of humor, which is one of the few pleasures still functioning. There is one more mechanism worth naming, because it drives the plot later. Prescience in Dune has a blind spot. Another prescient mind cannot be seen clearly, and the Ixians eventually build a machine that produces the same effect artificially. And Leto has spent 3,500 years on a project to make that blindness heritable in ordinary human beings, which will matter enormously, and which we will come back to. The cart he rides on was built for him by the Ixians. That detail is easy to skate past, and it should not be. Leto is a god with a state religion, and a priesthood, and an army of worshippers, and he cannot go anywhere at all without a piece of machinery designed and manufactured by the one civilization in the universe that treats his prohibitions as an engineering challenge. He sits on their product. They will build him something else later. And all of this, the body, the crowd, the vision, the loss, was chosen. That is the last fact to put down before we go backwards, because it is the one that makes him a character rather than a monster. Leto II was about 9 years old when he decided to do this to himself. He was a child. He could see the future perfectly well already, and he looked at what was coming for the human race and worked out that there was exactly one route through it, and that the route required somebody to stop being a person. He then went and did it on purpose, understanding what it would cost at 9. His father had stood in the same place, seen the same thing, and refused. Paul Atreides is the reason the Golden Path exists as an idea, and he is also the reason it took another generation to happen, and the shape of his failure is the foundation everything else is built on. The first novel is usually remembered as a triumph, which is a reading Herbert spent the rest of his life trying to correct. A young duke's house is destroyed by an imperial conspiracy. He escapes into the desert. The native population recognizes him as a prophesied messiah, and he takes the planet, the spice, and the imperial throne. That is the shape of the story, and it reads as a victory. It is not written as one. Paul spends the second half of that book watching a specific future coming toward him and trying to find a way around it, and failing. The Fremen are the best light infantry in the universe. They are religiously certain, and they have just acquired a living god. What comes out of that is not a change of government. It is a jihad, and Paul can see it. And every path he examines that saves his family leads through it. The numbers are given plainly in the sequel. The holy war carried out in Paul Atreides' name killed something on the order of 61 billion people, sterilized 90 planets, and wiped out 40 religions. He did not order it. He wrote it because refusing to write it made it worse. And he spent 12 years as emperor being worshipped for a slaughter he had watched approaching for years and failed to stop. Dune Messiah is the book where that bill arrives. He is trapped by his own prescience in a way the first novel only hinted at. Because he can see the future, his choices are constrained by what he sees, and because he is worshipped, every move he makes is scripture. The most quietly awful thing in that novel is Chani, the woman he loves, dying in childbirth. He saw it coming years ahead, examined the alternatives, and found that every branch in which she lived was worse for the species than the branch where she died. So he said nothing and let it arrive on schedule. That is the moment prescience in these books stops being a superpower. It becomes a man being shown in advance and in detail the deaths of everyone he loves and declining to prevent them on cost grounds. And then he was offered the way out and could not take it. What Paul saw at the end was the golden path. He understood it. He knew it worked. He knew what it required. And what it required was the sandtrout, the body, the tyranny, the millennia. He looked at it and decided he was not willing to become that. And instead, he took the traditional Fremen exit, blind, walking into the desert to die. Herbert is careful about how to read that. It is not cowardice exactly. There is a real argument that a man refusing to turn himself into an immortal dictator is behaving correctly. But the cost of the refusal is that the thing Paul was avoiding still had to happen, and the person who paid for it instead was his son. Which brings us to the third book, and the actual mechanics of the transformation, because they are stranger and more deliberate than the usual summary suggests. Children of Dune picks up with Paul's twins, Leto II and Ganima, both preborn, both 9 years old, both carrying the same crowd of ancestors and the same terrible clarity, and both watching their Aunt Alia lose her internal war. Alia's collapse is the engine of that book, and it is the clearest warning the series ever gives about what the children are. She was preborn too, and she held the crowd for years, and eventually one personality in it found the leverage to take her. The one who took it was her own maternal grandfather, Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, and he did it by offering exactly what she needed at the moment she needed it, which is how that particular failure always works. By the time the twins are old enough to assess her, the regent of the known universe is a woman being worn by the man who murdered her father, and the empire is being administered accordingly. There's also a preacher wandering the cities of Arrakis by then, blind, denouncing the religion that has been built around Paul Atreides. And the strong implication of the text is that he is Paul, come back out of the desert to attack his own church and finding that nobody in power wants to hear it. That is the situation the children inherit. A rotting theocracy in their family's name. An aunt who is no longer an aunt. A father who abdicated rather than pay. And the same appalling vision waiting for whichever of them looks at it directly. Leto goes looking for a way to see further than his father managed. He ends up at Jacurutu, the sietch of outcasts and water stealers, where he is deliberately fed enormous quantities of spice essence in an attempt to break him open. It works, in the sense that it does not kill him, and it does show him what he came for. He comes out of that trance, having seen the entire shape of the golden path, having verified that it is real and necessary, and having understood precisely what it costs. He also comes out of it having solved the problem that destroyed Alia, which is worth noting because it is the reason he survives the next 35 centuries. He does not suppress the ancestral crowd, and he does not let it govern. He arrives at an arrangement with it, an internal government of sorts, in which the multitude can be consulted without any single one of them being able to seize the controls. Alia lost because she was alone against them. Leto works out how to be the chairman. Then he goes into the desert and does something no human being has ever done. He finds sandtrout and lets them cover him. It is worth being clear about what that first covering actually was, because it was not immediately a transformation into a worm. It was a living skin, and the immediate effects were spectacular. The sandtrout skin gave him strength and speed far beyond human, near invulnerability, and the ability to cross open desert without water. He used it. He came back and dealt with Alia and with the Carino remnant, and he took the throne, and he did it as something that was still mostly a boy in an unnatural coat. The long-term effects are the ones he had actually signed up for, and he knew them going in. The skin was not going to come off. It was going to keep going. Over centuries, it would remake him into what is sitting on that cart at the start of the 4th book, and it would give him thousands of years to work in, and thousands of years was the entire point. What he needed could not be done in a human lifetime. It could not be done in 10. It required one continuous will, holding one continuous policy for longer than recorded history had run at that point, and there was no way to get that except by ceasing to be the kind of thing that dies. He also handled the succession before he stopped being able to. His sister Ganima married Farad'n Corino, and their descendants are the Atreides line that continues through the following millennia. Leto himself has no children and cannot have any. Everyone in this story with Atreides blood, including Moneo, including Siona, comes down from Ganima, and Leto has been supervising that bloodline like a man managing a herd for 3,500 years, which is exactly what he has been doing, and we will get to what he was breeding for. So the boy took the skin, took the throne, and began. And then the novel we are actually here for skips forward 3,500 years and lands us in a universe nobody from the first 3 books would recognize, run by a creature they would not recognize either, on a set of principles that took him 35 centuries to install. What he built with all that time is not what anyone expects a benevolent oracle to build. He was not trying to make people happy. He was not trying to make them free or prosperous or wise. Read his own account, and he is completely candid about it. He was trying to make them so profoundly, unbearably bored that when he finally died, they would run. The official name for the thing he built is Leto's Peace, and it is one of the great acts of deliberate awfulness in science fiction, because it works exactly as intended, and the intention is monstrous. Start with the machinery, because the philosophy makes no sense until the plumbing is clear. Everything in this universe runs on mélange, the spice. It extends life dramatically. It is the chemical basis of the guild navigators who fold space, which means it is the basis of all interstellar travel. It is what Bene Gesserit Reverend Mothers use to open the ancestral memory and become what they are. Remove the spice and civilization does not decline gracefully over a century. It stops on the same afternoon, everywhere at once. And there is a detail about melange that turns a commodity into a leash. It is addictive, and the addiction is not a matter of appetite. Past a certain level of exposure, withdrawal is fatal. A guild navigator cut off from spice does not become uncomfortable. He dies. A Reverend Mother cut off dies. Every noble in the Imperium who has been taking it for the life extension is on a hook that goes all the way through. Leto did not create that property, but he understood better than anyone who ever lived what it means to be the sole supplier of a substance that kills people when it stops arriving. Spice comes from the sandworms of Arrakis, and Leto killed the sandworms, all of them. He greened the planet, and sandtrout incest water, and a wet planet cannot support the worm life cycle. So the greening was an extinction program wearing the costume of terraforming. The last worms died out under his management, and the only melange left in existence is whatever he chooses to release from a hoard he accumulated in advance and hid somewhere nobody has found in 3,500 years. That is the leash, and it is total. The Spacing Guild, the most powerful commercial entity in human history, exists at his discretion because he can switch off its navigators. The Bene Gesserit, an order that has been quietly steering the species for 10,000 years, sends 2 representatives to Arrakis every decade to ask politely for their allocation. Every great house, every planet, every institution is on a drip feed controlled by one creature who has spent 3.5 millennia demonstrating that he will cut anyone off for any reason without explaining himself. With that in hand, he dismantled everything else. The Landsraad, the assembly of noble houses that was the nearest thing the old empire had to a check on imperial power, has been reduced to a handful of families kept on largely as decoration. Interstellar travel has been throttled to almost nothing, since moving anything requires the guild, and the guild requires him. Technological development has been suppressed for 35 centuries, which is why the Ixians, who keep developing things regardless, are simultaneously indispensable and heretical. Populations are pinned in place. Migration barely exists. Weapons research is dead. Whole categories of human activity were closed by administrative decision and have stayed closed for longer than most species survive. The result is the longest and most complete piece in human history, and reading about it is genuinely unpleasant. Nothing happens. There are no wars, because there are no armies except his. There's no famine and no plague, because the logistics are competently managed. There is also no invention, no exploration, no upheaval, no risk, no frontier, and no possibility of any. Historians have nothing to record and are not encouraged to try. Generations are born, live, and die inside a situation identical to the one their great-grandparents were born into and identical to the one their great-grandchildren will die in. A person in that empire can know with real accuracy what their descendants 400 years out will be doing on a given afternoon. He is not embarrassed about this. He considers it his central achievement. And when people call it stagnation, he agrees with them enthusiastically and asks them to keep going. Here's the argument, stated as plainly as it can be stated, because everything else hangs off it. Leto is not trying to produce a well-governed species. He is applying pressure. He believes a population held absolutely still for long enough will develop a reaction to being held still that goes deeper than politics or ideology, down past opinion, into the reflexes, into what people want, without being able to explain why they want it. He is not persuading anybody of anything, because persuasion wears off in a generation. He is conditioning a species, and when the pressure finally releases, and he has always intended it to release, the response will not be a policy or a movement. It will be a stampede. No. He compresses the spring for 3,500 years so that the release will be violent enough to throw humanity permanently out of his reach. Which brings us to Arrakis itself, and to the one piece of it he refused to green. The old desert is gone. There are forests, rivers, farmland, weather. The Fremen way of life that filled the first 3 novels is over, comprehensively and not by accident. What survives of the original desert is a single preserved region called the Sarir, kept dry on purpose, containing his citadel and the last place where the old conditions still hold. It is the final desert on Dune, and it is essentially a garden feature, maintained by the man who removed all the others. He did the same thing to the people. And this is where his contempt becomes interesting, rather than merely sour. The Fremen still exist, after a fashion. In settlements like Tuono village, they are called Museum Fremen. The name is exact, and it is not affectionate. They are paid a stipend to perform their own extinct culture. They wear still suits in a climate that does not require them, recite the old rituals, keep the vocabulary and the songs and the ceremonies alive, and they do it as a subsidized exhibit for a ruler who wanted the form preserved after the substance had been drained out of it. They have no water discipline because water is everywhere and nobody has needed the discipline for millennia. They have no worms to ride. They have never fought anything. When one of them is asked to demonstrate something his ancestors could do, the demonstration is approximate and slightly embarrassed. Leto's assessment of them is savage, and the savagery is aimed at himself as much as at them, because he is the one who did it. The Fremen were the most capable human beings in the universe, and they were produced by an environment that killed everybody who was not. He removed the environment and preserved the costume, and what he got was people playing dress-up in the ruins of their grandparents' seriousness. It reads, as a warning about every culture that survives as heritage after it has stopped being a way of staying alive, and it is one of the sharpest things in the book, precisely because the man making the observation is the one who ordered the change. 2 more constructions to name before we meet the rest of the cast. The first is the Royal Road, a raised ceremonial route running out across the Sarir and crossing the Idaho River on a high bridge. He named that river after Duncan, Idaho, the sword master who died for his grandfather in the first novel and who has been dying for the Atreides on repeat ever since. It is a joke Leto stopped explaining to anyone several centuries ago. Keep the road in mind. Keep the bridge in mind. Keep the water in mind. The second is Oln, the festival city, where every 10 years, the entire apparatus of the Imperium assembles to be received by its god. But before any of that, it is worth asking the question the machinery raises and the summaries skip, which is what Leto actually believes about power. Because he did not improvise this. He has a theory. He states it repeatedly, and it is the most quotable material in the novel for a reason. Leto II is the only ruler in fiction who has personally been every kind of government. That is not a flourish. The ancestral memory means he has inside him the actual experience of monarchs, bureaucrats, generals, priests, tax collectors, rebels, and the people. All of those were done too. When he makes a claim about how power behaves, he is not theorizing from books. He is reporting from a very large number of first-hand accounts that are awake and available, and occasionally arguing with him. His central claim about government is that it is a machine for producing its own opposite, and that the failure is structural rather than moral. Start with bureaucracy, which he detests, with a specificity that suggests long exposure. His argument is that any administrative body, given enough time, stops serving the purpose it was created for and starts serving itself. Not through corruption, necessarily, through inertia. The people inside it come to experience the survival of the department as the actual mission, because that is what their days are made of, and that is what their advancement depends on. Rules accumulate. Each one was sensible when written. Collectively, they become a wall, and eventually you have an apparatus that is enormously good at continuing to exist and no longer capable of doing the thing it was built to do, staffed entirely by people who are individually reasonable. His related claim is about aristocracies, and it is the sharpest thing he says. The reliable sign that an aristocracy has formed, he argues, is not wealth or titles or ceremony. It is the appearance of barriers against change. Whenever you find a structure whose energy goes into excluding the new and the different, you have found a ruling class protecting itself, whatever it happens to call itself, and whatever it believes about its own motives. The obvious objection is that Leto has built the most complete barrier against change in human history. And he would agree with you immediately and cheerfully. That is the whole point. He is not describing a mistake he avoided. He is describing the mechanism he is deliberately operating at maximum because he wants humanity to experience the thing at full strength and remember it. Then there is religion, and here his position is genuinely unusual because he is running one. Leto's argument is that religion and self-assertive government are a catastrophic combination, and that when a state acquires the ability to speak with divine authority, disagreement stops being politics and becomes heresy, at which point the ordinary corrective mechanisms of a society are gone. He is completely lucid about this. He also made himself a literal god with a priesthood, a scripture, and a worshiping army, and he did it on purpose, having worked out that this specific combination produces the most stable and the most stifling arrangement available. He built the worst possible system knowingly because he needed the pressure and because he wanted a demonstration that could not be misread. His view of the priesthood follows from that, and it is not flattering. The priests of the God Emperor are not, in his estimation, spiritually serious people. They are administrators of a franchise. They interpret his silences, sell access, manage the temples, and pursue their own internal politics with total absorption. And they have gradually built an entire theology around a being who is sitting right there and who could correct them at any time and generally does not bother. He watches his own religion misunderstand him for millennia and finds it useful, because a religion that has to interpret its God is a religion doing work, and a religion doing work is a stable institution. There is one more piece of his political thinking, and it is the one with the sharpest edge, because he is the case study. He argues that people do not learn from what a government says. They learn from what it does to them, and the lesson takes hold in proportion to how long it lasts and how deeply it is felt. Persuasion is useless at species scale. A generation can be argued into something, and the next generation will argue itself back out. What actually persists is the thing a population has lived through so thoroughly that it has stopped being an idea and become an instinct. The way a child who was genuinely hungry once treats food differently for the rest of their life. So he is not writing a warning about tyranny. He does not believe warnings work. He tried the alternative, watched his father's warning become scripture for a holy war, and drew conclusions. He is administering an inoculation. 3,500 years of absolute, competent, unbreakable, personally benevolent tyranny applied to every human being alive until the aversion is no longer an opinion anybody holds, but a reflex everybody has. He wants the species to be unable to tolerate being ruled like that ever again, in the way a body is unable to tolerate a substance that once nearly killed it. Which is a sentence worth sitting with, because it means every cruelty in this book is doing double duty. The tyranny is the pressure that will produce the scattering, and it is also the lesson itself. Same instrument, two purposes, and he is running it at full power for 140 generations. All of which is the view from the cart. The view from underneath is a different book, and Herbert is careful to give it to us, because an argument about tyranny that never shows you the ordinary afternoon it produces is not an argument at all. So what is it actually like to be an ordinary person in Leto's empire? The answer is that it is comfortable, safe, and quietly unbearable. And the three are the same fact seen from different angles. Start with what is genuinely good, because the novel does not cheat on this, and the argument would be worthless if it did. Nobody starves. There has not been a famine in living memory or in the memory of anyone's great-grandparents. There is no war anywhere at all, and there has not been for so long that the concept has become historical rather than practical. Violent crime is rare because the fish speakers are competent and everywhere and incorruptible. Plague is managed. Infant mortality is low. A child born in that empire will almost certainly reach old age, which is not something you could say about most of human history, and is not something you can say about the periods on either side of Leto in this series. By every measure a government usually gets graded on, he is running the most successful administration in the history of the species, by an enormous margin, for 3,500 consecutive years. Now the rest of it, there is nowhere to go. Travel between planets requires guild transport. Guild transport requires spice. Spice requires imperial permission. And imperial permission is rationed to a trickle. For practical purposes, a person is born on a planet and dies on it. The idea of relocating, of seeking a fortune somewhere else, of the frontier being a real option for a person of ordinary means, has been gone for so long that it has stopped appearing in the culture at all. There is nothing to invent. Technological development is suppressed, which means the tools available to a craftsman are the tools their ancestors used, and any genuine improvement attracts the wrong attention. The Ixians are permitted to innovate under license and under suspicion, and everybody else is not. There is nothing to decide. The Landsraad is decorative. Local administration is fish speaker administration, which answers upward to a god. There is no politics in the sense of a contest over the direction of anything, because the direction was set 35 centuries ago by a being who can see the future and does not take advice, and there's nothing to become. This is the part that does the real damage over generations. Ambition in that empire has no object. A gifted person can become a competent administrator inside an apparatus that will be identical in 400 years, or a priest inside a theology that is fixed, or a fish speaker, and that is essentially the list. The kinds of human striving that produce art, exploration, science, revolution, and enterprise all require a belief that effort changes the shape of things. And in Leto's piece, effort does not change the shape of anything, and everyone knows it. What comes out the other end is a population that is safe, fed, healthy, and dying of something that does not have a clinical name. Herbert's word for the condition, spoken through Leto, is not despair. It is closer to a slow suffocation that the sufferer cannot identify, because every individual component of their life is fine. That is the specific horror he is engineering. If the tyranny were brutal, people would resist it, and the resistance would be its own kind of vitality. Brutality gives a population something to push against, which is why brutal regimes produce heroes and songs. Leto's tyranny gives them nothing to push against at all. It is kind, it is competent, it solves problems, and it has removed, quietly and permanently, every reason to get out of bed with any urgency. He knows this, he designed it, and his reasoning is the coldest thing in his political thought, so it is worth stating carefully. He is not trying to make people miserable, because miserable people revolt, and revolts are absorbed and forgotten within a few generations. He is trying to produce an ache that has no target, sustained across 140 generations, until it stops being a feeling anyone has and becomes something the species is. He wants humanity to arrive at his death carrying an inherited, wordless, absolutely non-negotiable conviction that this must never happen again, and that safety on those terms is not worth having. The museum Fremen are the clearest illustration of the endpoint, which is why he keeps them and why he describes them so cruelly. They are what a people looks like a few thousand years after their reason for existing has been solved for them. They have the songs and the clothes and the words and the ceremonies. They do not have the thing the songs were about. And the Fremen, of all people, are the ones with the language for what has been done. Their old culture understood better than anyone that hardship was not merely survivable, but generative, that the desert made them and comfort would unmake them. Leto took that lesson, agreed with it completely, and then applied it in reverse at species scale as a weapon. There's a smaller and sadder detail worth adding. Siona's rebellion is, in a real sense, the healthiest thing happening anywhere in the Empire. It is doomed, badly resourced, and led by a young woman working from bad intelligence. It is also the only place in the known universe where human beings are taking a serious risk for something they chose. Leto knows that too. It is the reason his response to it is not to crush it. To hold all of this in place for 3,500 years, he needs an apparatus that will never once be tempted to take the Empire for itself, which is a very demanding specification for an army. Leto's army is entirely female. It is called the Fish Speakers, and it is not a palace guard or a ceremonial novelty. It is the only organized military force in the universe. Every other armed body was dissolved centuries ago, and the dissolution was permanent, and there is no second army anywhere for anyone to borrow. The name comes from the founding priestesses, who reported dreams in which they spoke to fish. Leto kept it, partly because it is faintly ridiculous, and partly because a name that cannot be traced back to a conquest is a useful thing to build an institution on. Armies named after victories acquire opinions about victories. They are more than his soldiers. They are his church, and the two functions are not separable. The God Emperor is not a flattering title in this setting. It is the established state religion of the known universe, with scripture, temples, a priesthood, and a worked-out theology. And the fish speakers worship him in the plain sense of the word. They also administer. A fish speaker garrison on a planet is simultaneously the military authority, the religious authority, and a substantial part of the civil administration, which means the Empire has one chain of command running from every provincial town straight up to a creature on a cart with nothing else in between and no rival structure anywhere. And they are, in the language the novel uses, without flinching, his brides. Every one of them, collectively. He cultivated that deliberately over centuries, and the erotic charge underneath their devotion is entirely intentional on his part and entirely sincere on theirs. It is also the load-bearing element of the whole arrangement, and it is going to become extremely dangerous later for reasons he has anticipated and allowed for. Their commanders, traditionally, are the Duncan Idahos. Now, why women? Leto explains this at length in the journals. It is the most argued about material in the book, and it deserves to be laid out accurately and then assessed honestly. His argument runs roughly like this. Armies of young men, he says, are historically unstable in one specific and repeating way. They develop an intense internal bond. They are physically capable and permanently keyed up, and when there is no external enemy available to absorb that, they turn it on to the civilian population they are nominally protecting. He points at the record, and he can point at it with more authority than anyone who has ever lived, since a fair number of the relevant participants are awake inside his skull and can be consulted directly. Sack cities, occupations. What garrisons reliably do to the towns they are garrisoned in, across every culture and every century, with a consistency that does not look like coincidence. His claim is that this is not a discipline problem that better officers solve. He argues it is a structural property of the arrangement itself, and that every civilization which has maintained a large standing force of young men has eventually been damaged by the Force rather than by its enemies. A female army, he claims, does not fail in that direction. He argues that women in that role bond differently, that they will hold a population without preying on it, and that the difference comes from a different fundamental relationship to the next generation. That is his position, stated with total confidence, and it is worth being clear about its status. It is central to how his empire functions, and it works flawlessly inside the novel. It is also a piece of 1981 science fiction, resting on assumptions about men and women that a great many readers have found essentialist and unpersuasive, and that objection is entirely reasonable. Herbert is not presenting a sociological finding. He is writing the interior reasoning of a character who has been alone with his own conclusions for 3.5 millennia and has nobody left alive capable of contradicting him. Leto's certainty about everything, including this, is a feature of Leto. Take it as his argument, held for his reasons, rather than as something the book has demonstrated. What is not in dispute is the result. The fish speakers are the most stable armed force in the history of the setting. In 3,500 years, they have never once attempted a coup, never turned on a civilian population, and never produced a general with ambitions. Given the base rate for standing armies, that is the single most improbable thing in the Empire. The mechanism that holds them is a ceremony, and it is the best scene in the middle of the novel. It is called Sienok, the Great Sharing, and it happens at Oln every 10 years. Leto meets his army, not all of them, a selected assembly, and being chosen for it is the central event of a fish speaker's life, the thing she will measure the rest of her years against. They gather in an enormous chamber. He is carried in on the cart. What follows is not a parade and not an inspection. It is communion. He speaks to them not as a commander addressing troops, but as a god addressing the only beings in existence he has agreed to be loved by. He gives them a portion of spice. He lets them look at him, which is itself the sacrament, because for most of them, this is the only time they will ever be in a room with the thing they have organized their entire existence around. And the response is total. Not discipline, not enthusiasm, not even fervor exactly. Something closer to religious ecstasy, physical and completely genuine, from thousands of armed women simultaneously, which is precisely what he engineered. And the reasoning is cold and correct. An army that has issued orders can be argued out of them. Orders can be questioned, countermanded, outbid by a rival with better terms, or simply disobeyed by someone who has concluded that the cause is not worth it. An army that has issued sacraments cannot be reached that way at all. There is no argument available because there is no proposition being asserted that could be shown to be false. He has removed politics from his military by replacing it with worship, and worship does not negotiate. That is also why the fish speakers are the only real danger in his empire, and he knows it. Their loyalty is emotional rather than institutional, and emotional loyalty has failure modes that institutional loyalty does not. It can be wounded, it can become jealous. Devotion at that intensity, aimed at a being who has never wanted anything, will behave in a very particular way on the day it discovers that he wants something after all. Herbert stages Sienok through the eyes of somebody in the room who has not been conditioned, which is the right choice, because the reader needs one person present who is appalled. That man is Duncan, Idaho, and he has been in this position before, many times. There has been a Duncan, Idaho at Leto's court, on and off, for 3,500 years. Not a family line, not a title handed down, the same man, grown again, over and over, from stored cells. The technology belongs to the Bene Tleilax, the Tleilaxu, who are the most quietly repellent faction in the setting. They grow golas, reconstructions of dead people, in what they call axolotl tanks. And the novels take a very long time to reveal what an axolotl tank actually is. And when they finally do it, is worse than anything the reader had guessed. The Tleilaxu hold Duncan, Idaho's original cells, taken after he died defending Paul Atreides in the first novel. And they have a standing order from the God Emperor. When the current one dies, ship another. They have been filling that order continuously for longer than the span between the building of the pyramids and now, several times over. Each one arrives as Duncan Idaho at roughly the age he was when he died. Same face, same reflexes, same swordmaster's training out of the Jinnah school, same temper, same absolute loyalty to House Atreides, and, crucially, the same memories. The memory part is worth pausing on, because it is not a copy operation. A Gola is grown blank, a physical duplicate with no past. Restoring the original personality requires a procedure the Tleilaxu perfected long ago. And the procedure works by applying psychological pressure until the buried self surfaces, which in practice means engineering a crisis severe enough to crack the new person open. It is done to every Duncan. It has been done thousands of times. The Tleilaxu are extremely good at it now, in the way anyone becomes good at a thing they have repeated for millennia, and the efficiency does not make it better. So each one wakes up genuinely believing himself to be the man who served Duke Leto I on Caladan. As far as he is concerned, he was in a knife fight a few weeks ago, holding a doorway against Sardaukar, buying time for a boy called Paul. Then he is told what year it is. That is the cruelty at the middle of the arrangement, and it is administered fresh every single time. He receives 35 centuries of consequences in one briefing. The Duke he loved is ancient history, and the house is a religion. The boy he died for grew up, became a messiah, presided over a holy war that killed something on the order of 61 billion people, and then walked blind into the desert. That boy's son is still alive, is now 5 tons of worm, rules every human being in existence, and is the one who signed the order to grow this particular Duncan. They tend not to take it well. There's no version of the briefing that goes well. Leto knows precisely what he is doing to them, and does it anyway, and his reasons split into 2 that he is candid about. The first is sentiment. Duncan Idaho is the last piece of his grandfather's household still in existence. Every other person who knew the Atreides as a family rather than as scripture is thousands of years dead. Leto keeps regrowing this one man, partly because he is the only one left who remembers Caladan, the sea, the household, what the Duke's voice sounded like. Leto has an entire ancestral mob available to him on request, and he still wants somebody in the room who was actually there in the ordinary way from outside his own skull. The second reason is colder, and it is why the Duncans matter to the argument rather than only to the mood. Duncan Idaho is a fixed standard. He is a human being from before all of this, uncontaminated by any of it, reproducible to specification whenever required. Every time Leto decants a new one, he obtains a clean instrument, calibrated to the year 10,191. And he can measure the present state of the species against it. What does this man find normal? What does he find intolerable? What has drifted so far that he no longer has the vocabulary for it? Leto is running a controlled experiment on humanity across 3,500 years, and the control is a man who does not know he is one. What the instrument keeps reporting is that everything is horrifying, which is exactly the reading Leto wants. Because the day a Duncan Idaho steps off the ship and finds this empire acceptable is the day the Golden Path has failed, and the conditioning has gone too deep to reverse. They do not last long. The novel is blunt about the mortality figures, and they are grim. Most of the Duncans die young and violently. Only a handful ever died of anything resembling old age. They are killed in fights, in coups, in accidents, and a meaningful number are killed on Leto's own order once they become inconvenient. At least one died attempting to kill Leto with a weapon of Ixian manufacture, which is the sort of event the God Emperor files as a data point rather than as a betrayal. The current one arrives into all of this and is given command of the fish speakers. Consider the position. He is a soldier of an Imperium that no longer exists, trained in a military tradition with no remaining practitioners, handed command of an all-female religious army that worships a worm in a court where the worm is his employer, his old duke's great-grandson, many times over, and God. He is expected to salute. He is surrounded by women who regard his commanding officer as a deity and himself as a sort of consecrated relic, which he finds unbearable, and which some of them find attractive in a way he finds worse. Herbert uses him without mercy. Duncan is the reader's proxy. When the novel needs somebody to look at all this and say plainly that it is obscene, Duncan says it. and he says it with the authority of a man who knew the Atreides when they were people, rather than doctrine. Sihanouk breaks something in him. He is present for the great sharing, and what he sees is not an army. He sees thousands of armed women in religious rapture directed at a creature on a cart. And he understands immediately that there is no chain of command here that could ever be appealed to, no oath to a house or a constitution, nothing but a god and worshippers, and that the worshippers are the only people in the universe permitted to carry weapons. His reaction is disgust. Underneath the disgust is fear. Underneath the fear is the recognition that everything he was trained to be is obsolete, and that he has been grown at enormous expense to be a museum piece with a sword. He also asked the question the fish speakers cannot ask, which is what all of this is for. And Leto, who could answer, mostly does not. You do not explain the experiment to the instrument. There's one thing Leto will discuss with him, and it is the thing Leto cannot stop talking about to anyone who will listen. Leto II considers himself the only honest historian who has ever lived. And the irritating part is that he has a case. Everyone else works from records. Records are written by people with interests, preserved by institutions with interests, and edited by centuries of copying. And by the time a historian gets to them, the thing that actually happened has been through so many hands that the account tells you more about the transmitters than the event. Leto does not have that problem. He was there, somebody in him was there, for a very large proportion of everything. And their testimony is available on request, in the first person, with the smell of the room attached. This gives him a relationship to the past that nobody else in the setting can share, and it has made him permanently contemptuous of written history. He is scathing about historians as a profession, and the contempt is specific rather than general. His complaint is that they mistake the surviving documents for the past, when the surviving documents are simply whatever happened to be durable and whatever somebody wanted kept. They reconstruct motives that were never held. They impose narratives that nobody living through it would recognize, and then subsequent generations learn the narrative and not the event. He has watched this happen to episodes he personally witnessed. He has read scholarly accounts of his own reign that were confidently wrong about things he did last century. It got worse when he became the subject. There is a body of material in his empire called the oral history, which is the unofficial version, the accumulated folklore about the God Emperor passed along outside the temples, and it coexists with the official priestly record, and neither of them is accurate. One is propaganda produced by an institution with an interest in him being unknowable. The other is rumor produced by a population with an interest in him being a monster. He is aware of both, reads both, and finds both useless. And there is nobody he can correct, because correcting them would require explaining, and explaining is the one thing the Golden Path does not permit. So he has spent 3,500 years watching the truth about the most consequential period in human history get replaced in real time by two competing fictions, while being the only person alive who knows what actually occurred. That is the loneliness that drives the journals. He dictates them constantly into Ixian recording devices in his own voice across millennia. And they are not a chronicle of events, they are an argument. They are the reasoning behind everything he has done, laid out by the only witness, addressed to nobody currently alive. He knows the priesthood would suppress them. He knows his enemies would weaponize them. He knows Tuono would misread them. And when she steals a copy, she does exactly that, looking for a warehouse and finding a philosophy she has no use for. The other thing Other Memory has done to him is stranger and explains a great deal about how he behaves in a room. He does not experience the past as past. For an ordinary person, the further back something is, the more it fades. For Leto, every era he carries is equally present, all of it available at the same intensity. And the effect is that his sense of scale has stopped working the way a human sense of scale works. A dynasty and an afternoon occupy comparable space in his attention. He will pause a conversation about the fate of a planet to think about a specific meal somebody ate 4,000 years ago, and the two things genuinely feel similar in weight to him because inside him they are. This is why he seems capricious to his court, and why the priests keep having to invent theology to explain it. He is not being inscrutable on purpose. He is a mind for whom all of human history is happening simultaneously, trying to hold a conversation with people who experience one moment at a time and are terrified. And it is also why he is so precise about the one relationship he has that runs on ordinary human time. There is a person at his court who has aged in front of him at normal speed over decades, and whose remaining span he can measure, and who is the closest thing to a friend the arrangement permits. His major domo, who used to want him dead. Moneo Atreides runs the empire in the ordinary sense of running it. Schedules, staff, allocations, the decennial festival, the security arrangements, the endless administrative sediment of governing every human being alive. He is exceptionally good at it. He has been doing it for decades. He is exhausted in a way that goes considerably deeper than tiredness. He is also an Atreides, descended from Ganima's line like every other member of the family, and he is Siona's father. Before any of that, he was a rebel. This is the fact that reorganizes everything about him, and it is why he is neither a coward nor a collaborator in any ordinary sense. Moneo did not arrive at that court as a loyal functionary looking for advancement. For years, he ran an underground organization dedicated to destroying the God Emperor, and he ran it well, because organization is the thing he is naturally excellent at. He was doing precisely what his daughter is doing now, with the same conviction, and almost certainly with better logistics. Leto caught him, and then, instead of killing him, did something considerably stranger. He took Moneo down into a maze of caverns concealed beneath the citadel, left him in the middle of it with a bag of food and a vial of spice essence, and abandoned him there. That was the test. Not an interrogation, not a punishment, not an attempt at conversion. A man alone in the dark, with enough spice to tear his mind open, expected to find his own way out, on the understanding that he would either come through it, sensitized to what Leto was doing and why, or he would not come through it at all. Plenty of people have not. This is the instrument Leto uses on anyone whose comprehension he actually requires. And it has a failure rate he considers acceptable, which tells you most of what you need to know about him. Moneo came out, and whatever he saw down there ended the rebel permanently. He does not serve out of fear, although he is afraid constantly and visibly. He serves because he was shown the golden path and he understood it. He knows what is coming for the species if this does not happen. He did not read about it or get talked into it. He experienced it directly, and the experience was not reversible, which raises the question the novel keeps circling, and it is genuinely uncomfortable. What is left of a person's freedom after they have been shown a true thing that permits only one response? Moneo did not change his mind through argument, so there is no argument that could change it back. He was handed direct experience of a fact, and the fact rearranged him. Ask him, and he will say he serves willingly, and he does. And he also cannot imagine not serving, and cannot unsee what he saw, and has spent every year since carrying knowledge that isolates him from every other human being alive. He is one of a very small number of people who know why the tyranny exists. He can never explain it to anybody, including his own daughter, because explanation does not work. Only the vial in the dark works. So he does the paperwork for decades, knowing the daily texture of that is one of the better things in the book. Moneo is the man who has to tell the God Emperor that the schedule has slipped. He manages the priesthood's egos, the guild's anxieties, the Bene Gesserit's requests, the arrival of each new Duncan, and the predictable emotional collapse that follows it. He arranges the movement of 5 tons of unwilling deity across the planet. He has developed, over decades, an exact working knowledge of his master's moods, the way a sailor knows weather, and he uses it constantly because Leto has killed people during audiences, and Moneo has watched him do it and has never once forgotten the tonal shift that precedes it. Their relationship is the warmest thing in the novel, and it is not warm. There is genuine affection running in both directions, and it never cancels the terror for a second. Moneo manages his own breathing in the presence of a being he loves. He has been in a low-grade physical crouch for so long that it has become his natural posture. Leto sees all of it, finds it useful, and occasionally finds it unbearable. Leto's own assessment of that loyalty is characteristically unsentimental. He regards devoted service of Moneo's kind as its own sort of marriage, a binding oath to duty and privilege that takes a good man completely. And he notes that there is a rot inside it, because a person who has organized his whole self around obedience has lost the capacity to generate anything new. Moneo is the finest thing Leto's system produces. Leto looks at his finest product and sees a man who has been used up, and he does not look away from the fact that he is the one who used him. Whew! And Moneo is tired. It is stated plainly, and it accumulates through the book until it becomes the most human thing in it. He wants it to be over. Not dramatically, not suicidally. It is the deep, ordinary want of a man who has been holding something extremely heavy for a very long time and would like to set it down. He has begun to think about his own death as a rest, and he has begun to think about it often, which sets up the two things he fears most, and they arrive in the same season. The first is his daughter. Siona is running exactly the rebellion he ran, and Moneo knows exactly how that ends, because it ended for him in a cavern with a vial. He knows she is going to be tested. He knows most people do not survive the test. He is the only person alive who understands what is actually going to be done to her. He is forbidden to warn her. He loves her, and he has to keep making the arrangements that bring it closer. There is no version of this in which he acts, and no version in which he is at peace, and he goes on scheduling. The second is that his master is changing. Moneo has served long enough to read Leto the way he reads weather, and what he has started to notice in the period this book covers is the God Emperor becoming more human. Not softer exactly, more present, more reachable, more like something capable of wanting. To Moneo, this is not touching, it is an alarm. His entire professional life rests on one structural fact, which is that Leto is not a man and therefore cannot be got at. Remove that, and the universe has a vulnerable ruler, and a vulnerable ruler is a dead ruler, and everything Moneo has paid for with his one finite life comes apart within the year. He is right about every part of it. He is simply wrong about whether it is happening by accident. Leto has been breeding his own family for 3,500 years, not guiding it, not quietly encouraging advantageous matches the way the Bene Gesserit did for 90 generations. Breeding it in the agricultural sense, with records, with selection, with culling, generation after generation after generation, choosing who marries whom among his own descendants, and doing it with the detachment of a man improving a herd. He has bred more human beings more deliberately than anybody in history, and every single one of them has been a relative. The mechanics are worth being concrete about, because the abstraction is comfortable and the specifics are not. Every Atreides descended from Ganima is on his register. He knows the lineage of each one, what traits they carry, what they produced last time. Marriages in that line are arranged, and they're arranged by him, and the people involved are informed rather than consulted. Moneo's own marriage was assigned. Siona exists because the God Emperor of the known universe looked at a chart and decided that these two particular descendants of his sister should produce a child. He was selecting for one trait. Everything else about a person, intelligence, health, temperament, loyalty, beauty, was secondary or simply irrelevant. What Leto wanted was a human being that prescience cannot see, not shielded by a machine, not concealed inside a field, genetically, heritably, permanently invisible to oracular vision, so that the trait would enter the human gene pool and spread through it and never be removable again. Siona is that. She is the finished product of the longest and most patient engineering project in the setting, and she has no idea, and she despises him, which is exactly right, and it is worth being clear about why it is right rather than simply ironic. Leto did not want a dutiful daughter of the house who would carry the trait obediently into the future. A compliant, invisible person is close to useless to him. The trait has to spread, and it will only spread if the person carrying it outlives him, breeds, and does so out from under his control, which means she has to want out. So he has deliberately raised a weapon that wants to be pointed at him, because a weapon that loved him would stay in the drawer. That is also the coldest thing he does in the entire book, and it is easy to miss because it does not look like cruelty. He engineered his descendants' hatred as a design requirement. Siona's rage, which is the most alive thing about her, and the thing she would name if asked what makes her herself, is a specification. She is worth describing on her own terms because she is not merely a plot function. She is young, physically formidable, and furious in a way that is completely earned. She is a fast runner, which saved her life in the Force and which she is quietly proud of. She has organizational instincts she inherited from a father she does not understand. And she's possessed of the particular clarity of someone who has correctly identified that the world is wrong and has not yet been given any reason to doubt her own solutions. Her rebellion is small, sincere, and doomed, made up of young people who are genuinely brave and comprehensively outmatched. They mostly know it. What they have is fury, and the fury is legitimate because they live in a universe where nothing has happened for 3,500 years. Every avenue of human ambition has been closed by administrative order, and one creature owns every gram of the substance civilization runs on. Siona is not wrong about her situation. She's wrong about almost nothing, in fact, except the single thing nobody is permitted to tell her. After the Force, she has the journals, and she cannot read them. They are encrypted. The work of breaking them is slow. And what she is hoping to find is the location of the spice hoard, which would hand the rebellion the only lever that exists. What she eventually extracts is not a warehouse. It is something considerably more dangerous, and it is the reason he let her take them. She learns that he can be killed. Specifically, she begins to understand the business about water, and she begins to understand that the invulnerable God Emperor travels regularly along a raised ceremonial road that crosses a river. He gave her the manual. That is not a figure of speech. He knew which packet she would take. He knew the route through the trees. He knew she would survive and that two of the others would not. And the contents of that packet amounted, in the most practical sense available, to the instructions for his own assassination. Her organization also contains two people who are not what they appear. One is a man named Topri, an informer, and he is the ordinary kind of problem. Rebellions leak. Topri is careless, self-important, and compromised, and the novel treats him with roughly the contempt that sort of person earns. The other is Nayla, and Nayla is the most important minor character in the Dune series. Nayla is a fish speaker. She is physically enormous, blunt-featured, slow-spoken, and not clever, and her devotion to Leto is not merely religious. It is absolute in a way that has removed her capacity for interpretation altogether. She does not believe Leto is a god the way a devout person believes a thing, holding it against doubt. She knows it, the way she knows that dropped objects fall. There is no gap in her anywhere for a second opinion to occupy. Leto placed her inside Siona's rebellion years ago as his own agent. Siona trusts her completely, and the trust is not misplaced in the way you would expect. Nayla has proved herself repeatedly, taken real risks, and killed for the rebellion. Her loyalty to Siona is not a performance. That is the piece people get wrong when they retell this story. Nayla genuinely serves Siona, faithfully and wholly, and she does it because her God instructed her to, and the instruction was not to infiltrate or to subvert or to report back. The order Leto gave her was to obey Siona in everything, without exception. Sit with the shape of that, because it is one of the most elegant traps Herbert ever built. Leto has placed a fanatically obedient soldier carrying a lasgun inside the organization that wants him dead, and has ordered her to do whatever its leader tells her. Nayla will never disobey Siona, because disobeying Siona would be disobeying God. The single most reliable member of the rebellion is the God Emperor's own hand, and it will do absolutely anything the rebellion asks of it. He assembled that years before the events of this novel, and then he waited. Which leaves the question of what the whole program was actually buying, and it takes us to the strangest of his objectives. Leto is trying to blind the future. Not his own, everyone's. Permanently. He has concluded that prescience itself, the capacity of any single mind to look forward and see where the human species is and where it is going, is not a gift or a curiosity, but the specific mechanism by which humanity gets destroyed. His father demonstrated a small version of it and was crushed by it. Leto demonstrates the full version daily. A mind that can see all of it, can hold all of it, and a species that can be held entirely in one vision by one mind is a species that can be managed, herded, and eventually killed in a single decision by whoever is holding the vision at the time. His answer is to make people unfindable. Siona's trait, spreading outward through the gene pool across the millennia to come, means no future oracle will ever again scan humanity and see the whole of it. There will always be people missing from the picture, and a picture with holes in it cannot be used to run a species or to hunt one. So he is deliberately destroying the instrument that made him possible, using the family that made him possible, and he still has not told anybody what he saw. Every 10 years, the entire universe comes to him and asks. The Festival at Oln is the one occasion when the machinery of the Imperium becomes visible in a single room. And Herbert uses it the way a novelist uses a wedding, which is to get everyone who wants something into the same building. The God Emperor leaves the Citadel and travels to the festival city. And the journey is itself a state occasion, a procession out of the Sarir with the royal cart, the fish speaker escort, Moneo attending, and the current Duncan, Idaho, in command of security. On this particular journey, somebody tries to kill him, and the attempt produces the best action sequence in the book. The attackers are face dancers, the Tleilaxu's other specialty. A face dancer is an engineered shapeshifter, able to take on the appearance of another person with enough fidelity to walk into their life and be accepted by people who know them. They are not disguised, they are a very good copy, and the ordinary countermeasures do not work. Their plan is intelligent. In a confused attack on the Imperial procession, the thing that stops assassins is the fish speaker guard, and the guard takes its orders from its commander. So the face dancers come at the procession wearing Duncan, Idaho. Several of them, all with his face, all in his uniform, moving through a fight in which the guard is trying to work out in real time who to protect and who to cut down. If the guard hesitates for even a few seconds, the assassins reach the cart. Duncan solves it in about 4 seconds, and the solution is so blunt it is almost rude. He takes his clothes off. He strips in the middle of a fight and stands there naked, and every copy of him is still dressed. Because a face dancer reproduces what it prepared to reproduce, and not one of them prepared for that. The fish speakers now have a rule requiring no judgment whatsoever, which is to kill every Duncan, Idaho wearing a uniform, and they are exceptionally good at killing things. The face dancers are cut apart in moments. It is a lovely piece of characterization, dressed as an action beat. Duncan has spent the entire novel being outclassed intellectually by everyone around him. What he is, underneath the anger and the dislocation, is a fighting man of extraordinary practical intelligence. And in the one domain where he is the best in the room, he solves an apparently unsolvable problem instantly and without any ceremony at all. It is also, quietly, the answer to why Leto keeps regrowing him. The attack is not the only move being made that week, and the others are more characteristic of how this empire actually works. The Bene Gesserit have sent 2 Reverend Mothers, Anteak and Luceal, and their position is delicate to the point of absurdity. The sisterhood built the Atreides bloodline across 90 generations and then lost control of it, first to Paul, then to the thing Paul's son became. They have spent 3,500 years being permitted to continue existing. They need their spice allocation, without which the order simply ends. And they have to come and ask for it in person every decade from a being who knows precisely what they are. They bring Leto genuine intelligence, which is that the Ixian embassy has been taken over by face dancers, and an attack is planned. In that moment, they are being useful allies, and they understand that usefulness is the only currency they have left. They're also running their own operations simultaneously, which is entirely characteristic of the order and which Herbert handles with real economy. Anteak occupies Leto's attention, while Lucial approaches him carrying a vial of spice essence intended for use against him. It does not work. Very little works on Leto. But the detail matters more than the outcome, because it establishes the actual texture of his court. Every faction present is simultaneously serving him and trying to remove him. The Bene Gesserit warn him about assassins while attempting an assassination. The Tleilaxu supply his Duncans and send shapeshifters to kill him. The Guild manages its dependency and quietly hopes the Ixians build his cart, his recording devices, and something considerably more sophisticated than any of this. He knows all of it. He has known for centuries. He permits it. And the reason is consistent with everything else about him. A universe with no plotting left in it would be a universe that had genuinely surrendered, and total surrender is the one outcome the Golden Path cannot survive. He needs them still trying. The scheming is a vital sign. It is worth looking at how each of them has managed to still be here, because 3,500 years is a very long time to survive, as a rival power to something that can see you coming, and each of the survivors solved it differently. The Spacing Guild solved it by becoming harmless. They were, in the first novel, arguably the most powerful institution in human affairs, because they own transport, and transport is leverage over everything. Leto took their supply, and with it, their independence. And what remains is a service provider that has spent 3.5 millennia being extremely careful. They do not scheme much anymore. They calculate, which is what navigators do. And every calculation returns the same answer, which is that the spice comes from him, and there is no arrangement in which crossing him ends well. The Bene Gesserit solved it by being useful and patient, which is what they always do. They lost control of their own breeding program to Paul, and then to Leto, which is the single greatest failure in the Order's history. And their response was to absorb it, keep the records, keep the training, keep the Reverend Mothers, and wait for the situation to change. Their entire strategy is outliving the problem. Against a being who is not going to die of anything, that is not obviously a strategy at all, and they know it, and they have no better idea. They also have the useful property that Leto genuinely respects them, in the way one professional respects another, because they are the only faction whose long-term thinking operates on anything like his timescale. The Tleilaxu solved it by making themselves the sole supplier of something he wants, which is the same move he made on everybody else, and it is the reason he tolerates them despite their being repellent and despite their trying to kill him with some regularity. They grow the Duncans. Nobody else can. As long as that holds, they have a seat. And Ix solved it by continuing to do the forbidden thing quietly, in a corner, with his knowledge and effectively with his permission, which is the arrangement that eventually kills him. That is the whole board. 4 powers, 3 of them managing their decline with varying grace, and 1 of them building. So he holds his audiences. And the audiences are where his sense of humor becomes visible. He has a repertoire developed over millennia. He can be enormous and completely still until the person in front of him begins to babble. He can rear the front of that body up off the cart, which ends most conversations. He has killed people during audiences, and everyone in the queue knows it. And he is aware of exactly what that knowledge does to the person currently walking toward him. What he watches for in the first few minutes is the shape of their fear, because fear is the most reliable diagnostic instrument he has. Everybody has some. The useful information is in which kind. Tribute is delivered. Grievances are heard and mostly dismissed. Allocations are set for the next 10 years, which determines who thrives and who quietly fails across the entire species. The God Emperor is carried through his city and adored by an army that would die on request, and occasionally does. And in the middle of all that routine decennial business, the Ixians present their new ambassador. Leto looks at her and finds that she is not there. Not absent from the room, absent from the future. Her name is Hwi Nori, and the first thing Leto notices about her is an absence. He has scanned the coming years more times than there are years in recorded history. She has never appeared in any of them, not once. And a mind that has been reading the future continuously for 35 centuries does not experience a gap in that future as nothing. It experiences it as a shape. There is exactly one technology in the universe that produces a hole like that, Exactly one civilization owns it, and there is exactly one reason to spend it on delivering a diplomat. He works all of this out inside the first few minutes of meeting her. Then, he falls in love with her anyway, announces that he intends to marry her, and roughly a year later, that decision has killed him. Ix is worth a moment because their whole civilization is an argument with the rule everyone else lives by. After the Butlerian Jihad, the ancient war against thinking machines, humanity adopted a prohibition against building a machine in the likeness of a human mind, and it governs everything in this universe. The Ixian position on that prohibition is essentially a very long discussion of what likeness means. They are the machine culture, the manufacturers, the people who build the devices everyone needs and nobody asks about. They built Leto's cart. They built the recording equipment he dictates his journals into. He knows they are heretics and lets them work because the Golden Path needs technological variety in the mixture, and because watching them skirt the prohibition is one of the few things left that holds his attention. They had been working on the problem of Leto for a long time, and they had already run one operation, and understanding why it failed is what produced Hwi. That first operation was a man named Malky. He was the Ixian ambassador for years, and he was, by any measure, the most successful agent anyone ever ran at the God Emperor, and he achieved nothing at all. Malky was corrupt, sensual, sardonic, and entirely without reverence. He ran the embassy like a private club, imported things that were not permitted, drank seriously, and when summoned before a creature whose priesthood executed people for insufficient enthusiasm, he made jokes. He argued. He used Leto's name. It was not bravery so much as a missing organ. He looked at 5 tons of armored worm and saw somebody interesting to talk to and behaved accordingly. And it worked because it was the one approach nobody in 3,000 years had tried. He was also useful in a second way. Leto cannot eat, drink, touch, or want anything a body wants, and what he retains is an old memory of having wanted them. Malky went out into the universe, consumed it enthusiastically, came back and described it. He was a sensory proxy. And every one of those evenings was an intelligence operation, because Ix read the transcripts, looking for the shape of the hole in him. Leto knew. Of course he knew. He understood exactly what Malky was, who had sent him, and what was being recorded, and he enjoyed the man anyway, and gave Ix nothing for years. That is the pattern worth holding on to about Leto II. He does not get fooled. He gets tempted, evaluates the temptation with complete information, and walks into it deliberately because he has decided the price is acceptable. When Ix sat down to work out why years of access had produced no leverage, they arrived at something genuinely astute and genuinely cruel. Pleasure was never going to work on a man who had voluntarily abolished every appetite he had. The thing he responded to was not what Malky described. It was Malky himself, the fact of being spoken to as a person. And Malky, being what he was, could offer company, but was constitutionally incapable of offering anything deeper. He could not love anybody. So the design brief wrote itself. The target cannot be moved by pleasure, threat, or persuasion. The target can be reached by being genuinely loved by someone who is not afraid of him. Our best agent could not do that. Build one who can. There is a coldness in that reasoning that is easy to skate past. Ix looked at a disfigured, functionally immortal, catastrophically lonely man, correctly identified that what he had been starved of for 3 millennia was ordinary human tenderness, and filed it as an exploitable vulnerability. Then they went into a laboratory to manufacture the tenderness. They had Malky's genetic material, because Ix does not discard a validated component. And they had just finished the most consequential machine anybody builds in the entire 6-book sequence. It is a sealed chamber generating a field that does not stop light or matter, but does stop oracles. Events inside it cast no shadow forward. A prescient mind sweeping the future finds a hole where the room ought to be, cannot look inside it, and cannot see anything that happens there. It is worth appreciating what that means in a universe organized entirely around prophecy. Every power in the Imperium has spent 10,000 years assuming that sufficiently gifted minds can see what is coming, and the entire security architecture of human civilization, the Bene Gesserit's planning, the Guild's navigation, Leto's whole reign, rests on that assumption. Ix has just built an off switch, and they built it in a workshop out of engineering, with no bloodline and no spice and no mysticism involved at all. The heretics were right. You can beat prophecy with a machine. They will eventually wrap that field around a starship hull, which produces the No Ship. And the No Ship dominates the last two novels, because a vessel nobody can find changes every rule there is. All of that starts here, in a sealed room built for one small purpose. The purpose was a place where they could do work that God could not watch. What they grew in it was Malki, cloned, female, and raised from the first cell division inside the field. Then they raised that copy to be his opposite in every respect that mattered. And this is the part of the operation that deserves real admiration in the way a beautifully made weapon does. Their target has thousands of years of liars and seducers awake in his skull and reads intention the way a physician reads a chart. Any agent carrying a hidden purpose is transparent before the door shuts. So a seductress fails. An infiltrator fails. Anyone performing sincerity fails instantly, because performance is precisely the thing he detects. The Ixian solution is the most interesting idea in the novel. If deception cannot survive contact with the target, remove the deception. Do not build an agent who pretends to be kind. Build one who is kind, actually, and all the way down, with nothing underneath it, because a weapon with nothing hidden in it is the only kind that gets through a mind which finds everything hidden. It worked perfectly, and it failed completely, for a reason nobody at Ix anticipated. If your weapon has to be sincerely good in order to function, then your weapon has a conscience. And a conscience can look at the target and at the people who did the aiming and reach its own conclusions. Leto told her what she was. He laid out the hidden facility, the chamber, whose cells she was grown from, what she had been specified for, and that he had known since roughly the third minute. What broke through was not that she had been used. It was what had been done to him, that people had studied his loneliness the way engineers study a stress fracture, and that their response to finding it had been to build a person shaped like the missing affection and mail her to him. She changed sides, told him everything she knew about Ix, and stopped being their ambassador in any meaningful sense. The instrument defected to the target. He told her he loved her, which he had not said to another living being in 3,500 years, and then announced that he would marry her, and the Imperium briefly lost its mind. It is worth being concrete about why. He is not a king with an empty chair beside him. He is the established god of a state religion, and he is physically incapable of what a marriage is conventionally for. Everyone understands the wedding can only ever be symbolic, which is exactly why it detonated. A god does not need a symbol. The announcement informed the universe that the God Emperor wanted something, and worse, wanted something a human being wants. The fish speakers took it hardest, and the observation is sharp. They are his brides, collectively. And an actual singular bride does not read as a state occasion. It reads as displacement. There is real grief in it, and real danger, because they are the only organized violence in existence, and their loyalty is emotional rather than political. Moneo saw the actual danger and went to Leto and warned him, and the warning was not about scandal. He could see the one load-bearing fact of the universe dissolving, which is that the God Emperor cannot be reached. A Leto who can be reached is a Leto who can be killed. Leto's answer, in substance, was that Moneo was right about every part of it. Around this time, he sent for Malki, recalled him from a comfortable retirement, and questioned him about how she had been made. The specifications, the conditioning, the intentions. It is a sour, strange scene. The God Emperor interrogating his one old friend about the manufacture of the woman he intends to marry, and Malki being exactly what he always was about the whole business. He did not leave Arrakis again. On Leto's authority, Moneo killed him. That killing is easy to read past, and should not be. Malki was the last person alive who had ever treated Leto as a man rather than a deity, and Leto ended him as administrative housekeeping while preparing to marry his clone. The prototype had become a security liability. Who knew how the finished product was built? Meanwhile, There is unfinished business out in the sand. Leto took Siona into the Sarir, and what happens there is the center of the book. He does not interrogate her about the rebellion. He does not punish her for the raid or for the journals or for the 2 men who died in the forest. He takes her out into the last desert on Arrakis, on foot, away from everything, and in effect tells her to find her own way back. This is the same instrument he used on her father in the caverns, and it has the same 2 possible outcomes, and he is entirely willing to accept either. The desert does what deserts do. Siona is Atreides, and she is tough, and she is nowhere near as prepared as she believes. She makes a specific and fatal error, which is that she neglects the mouth flap of her stillsuit, the part of the Fremen garment that captures the moisture in exhaled breath. It is the most basic discipline the old Fremen had, drilled into children, and it has been 3,500 years since anyone needed it. She is a rebel from a green planet wearing the equipment of a dead culture, and she does not really know how to use it. She loses water she cannot replace, and by the 5th day, she is dying. And at that point, the only liquid available to her in the entire universe is the spice essence that Leto's own body produces, seeping from the joins of him, and she drinks it. What follows is the reveal the entire novel has been withholding, and it arrives the way Herbert wanted it to arrive, which is not as an explanation from Leto, but as direct experience by somebody who came out there hating him. She sees the golden path. Here is what is actually in it, in plain terms. Left alone, humanity dies. Not from any of the obvious things, not war, not the guild, not the Bene Gesserit, not even from a tyrant. It dies because it is findable. What Leto saw coming, and what Siona now sees, is a future containing seeking machines. Hunting devices, artificial and tireless, that pursue human beings across space and exterminate them wherever they are. And the crucial property is the wherever. There is no hiding place. Humanity in Leto's era is concentrated inside one mapped, cataloged, thoroughly known volume of space. Every planet on a register, every population counted, every route between them controlled by a single transport monopoly, and the whole arrangement legible in a single prescient glance. A species arranged like that is not a civilization. It is an inventory. Anything sufficiently determined that comes hunting can simply work down the list. And prescience is not the defense against that. Prescience is what makes it possible. This is the part that takes a moment to land, and it is the real argument of the book. An oracle who can see all of humanity has, by definition, produced a complete picture of humanity. That picture is the targeting data. It does not matter whether the oracle is benevolent. It does not matter whether the oracle is Paul or Leto or something that comes later and is not human at all. The existence of a mind capable of holding the entire species in one view is the vulnerability, because sooner or later, something will hold that view and not be friendly, and on that day, there is nowhere left to run and no possibility of a survivor nobody counted. So the fix has 2 halves, and Leto has been executing both of them simultaneously for 35 centuries. The first half is invisibility. Siona's trait, spreading outward through the human genome across the millennia to come, means that no future oracle will ever see all of it. There will always be people missing from the vision. The picture will always have holes, and a picture with holes cannot be used to hunt a species to extinction. The second half is dispersion, and this is what the tyranny was for. Humanity has to leave, not colonize in an orderly imperial fashion, which just extends the register. It has to scatter chaotically in every direction, in numbers and distances that no authority tracks and no map records, until there is no longer any such thing as a complete list of where human beings are. And people do not do that voluntarily. Comfortable populations do not fling themselves into unmapped space. They need to be moved by something deeper than argument. So he made the known universe unbearable. That is what Leto's piece was for. All of it. The stagnation, the closed frontiers, the crushed technology, the boredom stretched across 100 generations. until it stopped being a political condition and became something closer to a species-level reflex. He was building pressure. He has always intended to die and release it. And when it releases, humanity will not migrate. It will bolt outward in every direction at once, past the edges of every map, into a dispersion so total that no oracle and no hunting machine will ever be able to find all of it. That is the golden path, invisibility plus dispersion, purchased with 3,500 years of tyranny and one man's entire humanity. Siona sees all of it and survives and comes back. And she still hates him. That is the point, and it is the most important thing about the ending. She does not come out of the desert converted the way her father did. She accepts that he is right because she has now seen with her own mind that he is right, and she remains absolutely certain that he has to be stopped and that his death is a good thing. Both of those, at once, permanently. She also learns the other thing the vision showed her, which is that he cannot see her. In all of that endless branching future, she is not there, and neither is anyone descended from her. Which means the God Emperor of the known universe, for the first time since he was a child, is standing in front of a person whose next move he does not know. There is a thing Leto is afraid of, and it is not being killed. He has been trying to arrange his own death for a very long time. This is stated more directly in his journals than most readers expect, and once it is visible, the whole novel reorganizes around it. The Golden Path does not end with Leto ruling forever. It ends with Leto dead at a specific moment, in a specific manner, at human hands. His death is not the failure state, it is the deliverable. What he is afraid of is not managing it in time. The transformation has never stopped. The sandtrout have been converting him for 3,500 years, and the process runs in one direction only. More of him becomes worm each century, and less remains Leto, and he can feel the ratio moving. He has estimated the remaining span with the same instrument he uses for everything else, and the estimate is a few thousand years before there is no person left at all. And here is the part that makes it a horror rather than a mortality. The thing does not stop when he does. When the last of Leto is gone, the creature on the cart continues. It goes on existing, goes on being worshipped, goes on being obeyed by an army that cannot distinguish between the god it loves and the animal that replaced him, and there will be nobody home. The Empire would continue running for an indefinite period on the momentum of a dead man's authority, administered by a priesthood interpreting the silences of something that has no interior left. He calls the state he is heading toward the endless dream, and it is not a metaphor for death. Death would be a resolution. It is a metaphor for continuing without a self, awake in some minimal animal sense forever, which is precisely the fate he has already arranged for the sandtrout fragments that will carry pieces of him into the worms. So the clock in this novel is not the rebellion and it is not Ix. It is the slow dissolution of the only person capable of ending the tyranny, running against the date by which the tyranny has to end. Which explains the thing about his reign that otherwise looks like vanity, which is his refusal to arrange a successor. He could. Obviously, he could. He has bred his own family for 35 centuries and could produce an heir to any specification he liked. And he has an entire priesthood that would install anybody he named. He does not do it, and his reasoning is the sharpest application of his political thought in the book. An institution that survives its founder is the failure. If Leto's piece outlives Leto, then the lesson does not land. Because the thing being taught is not that this particular tyrant was bad. The species already knows that. The thing being taught is that arrangements like this are intolerable in principle, and that lesson requires the arrangement to die with the man completely and irrecoverably, leaving nothing that could be picked up and restarted by somebody arguing that it worked well enough. So he has spent his reign making himself structurally irreplaceable and then making sure there is no replacement. He is the only source of spice. He is the only object of the religion. He is the sole commander of the only army. Every dependency in the universe runs through a single creature, on purpose, so that when the creature dies, the whole apparatus fails at once and cannot be reassembled by anyone. That is also his answer to the obvious objection about the addiction. And it is worth stating because it is the least comfortable part of his reasoning. He has made the entire species dependent on him. Not just chemically, though the spice does that, but institutionally and psychologically, across 140 generations who have never known any other arrangement and cannot really imagine one. A gentler ruler would taper that off, devolve power gradually, build successor institutions, and hand over responsibly. Leto's position is that tapering does not work on a dependency this deep, and that a managed transition would simply produce a smaller version of himself with better manners, and then another until somebody eventually rebuilt the whole thing. The only cure for a dependency at that scale is total, sudden, catastrophic withdrawal. So he is not planning a handover. He is planning a collapse. And he has spent millennia making sure the collapse will be complete enough that nobody can patch it. The famine times, which kill an enormous number of people after his death, are not a tragic side effect of a plan that went slightly wrong. He saw them. He included them. He decided the price was acceptable, and he has never anywhere pretended otherwise. Now put Hwi Nori back into that picture, because this is where the novel becomes genuinely difficult rather than merely bleak. For 3,500 years, the plan required him to be dead on schedule, and the plan was the only thing he had. Then a woman walked into his audience chamber out of a hole in his vision and gave him the first thing he had ever been given, and he now has, for the first time since he was 9 years old, a reason to want the arrangement to continue a little longer. He does not take it. That is the measure of him. He knows exactly what the betrothal exposes, having been told so by the one man qualified to tell him and having conceded every word of it. He knows the fish speakers will not absorb it well. He knows a reachable God is a killable God, and he goes on being reachable in public on a schedule. The most straightforward reading of the ending is that he is not merely permitting his death, he is finally, after millennia of preparation, executing it. And that the presence of Hwi is what makes it executable, because a man who has been alone for 3,500 years and has nothing to lose can arrange his own murder as an item of policy, but he cannot particularly want the morning to arrive. Give him 1 year of being loved, and he can go into the river with something worth going in for. Whether that is a comfort he was given or a comfort he arranged for himself is the one question his instrument cannot answer, because the instrument cannot see her. And the last piece of the machine is put into position, as these things tend to be, by somebody trying to prevent exactly the disaster he causes. Duncan, Idaho, falls in love with Hwi Nori. He was always going to. He's a soldier 3,500 years out of his own time, surrounded by women who worship a worm, morally disgusted by everything he sees, and she is the one person at that court who treats him as an ordinary human being. She was engineered from the ground up to be irresistible to a lonely man with Atreides connections. She was aimed at Leto. Duncan simply walked into the blast radius. They become lovers, and Moneo finds out. Moneo has a genius for damage control, and he moves immediately because he can see precisely what happens if the God Emperor's attention lands on this. So he gets them out of reach. He sends Duncan away to Tuono village, the Museum Fremen settlement out along the Royal Road, dressed up as a posting and functioning as an evacuation. And he sends Tuono with him. He is trying to protect his daughter and the commander at the same time, and he puts the two of them together in a village at the edge of the Sarir. A humiliated, enraged, effectively unkillable warrior, and the one person in the universe the God Emperor cannot see, in the same place, with nothing to do. Leto finds out where they are, and then he does the thing that settles the argument about this novel. He moves the wedding. The ceremony had been arranged for the village of Tabur. On learning that Moneo has sent Siona and Duncan to Tuono, Leto instructs him to relocate the entire event there instead. The God Emperor of the known universe, who can see the future continuously and in detail, who has never once been surprised by an assassination attempt in 35 centuries, personally redirects his own wedding procession to the village where his enemies are waiting, along a raised road, across a high bridge, over running water. That is not carelessness. It is not love making him stupid. There is no reading of that decision available in which he does not know exactly what he is doing. Out at Tuono, Siona works out the shape of it. The God Emperor is invulnerable to essentially every weapon that exists, and he is about to be carried across a river gorge. And water is the one substance in the universe that unmakes him. The bridge does not have to kill him. It only has to drop him. Duncan, who is the best practical soldier available, organizes the ambush. The obstacle is that nobody can get near the supports, except that the rebellion contains a fish speaker of absolute devotion, carrying a lasgun, placed there years ago by Leto himself, under a standing order from her god, to do whatever Siona tells her. So Siona tells her to cut the bridge. Nayla does it, believing she is obeying Leto, which she is. That is not a technicality. It is the entire architecture of his death. The command that killed the God Emperor of the known universe was issued by the God Emperor of the known universe years earlier to a woman selected for her incapacity to disobey. The procession comes out along the royal road in the morning, the royal cart with Leto on it, Hwi beside him, Moneo attending as he has attended for decades, the fish speaker escort around them. What passes between Leto and Hwi on that last stretch of road is quiet, and it is the reason the book works. She has, by this point, been told everything. She knows she is a manufactured object, a copy of a dead man's genome raised in a sealed room by technicians who wrote her personality down in a document before she existed. She knows the tenderness she feels is the output the specification called for. And she has gone through all of that and come out the other side, having decided it does not matter. Because whatever the provenance of the feeling is hers, and it is pointed at him. And on his side, for the first time in 3,500 years, is somebody who looks directly at what he has become, without flinching and without worshiping. Not the fish speaker's adoration, which is aimed at a god and would land on any god. Not Moneo's frightened competence. Not Duncan's moral disgust. She looks at 5 tons of ribbed worm flesh, with a shrunken human face in the front of it, and sees the person who climbed inside that to save a species that will never know it was saved. He is, by any available measure, happy. It is the only stretch of the novel where that word applies. He also knows exactly what is waiting at the bridge, and he keeps the cart moving. The lasgun takes the supports. Lasguns in this universe cut, and what they cut through is the structural spine of a span built to carry a 5-ton deity across a gorge, and the engineering does the rest. The bridge comes apart in sections, and the whole procession, the escort, the attendants, the cart, and everyone on it goes into the gorge. Moneo catches a cable on the way down and hangs there for a moment. And from that position, in the last seconds of a life spent maintaining the machinery of the Golden Path, he watches Hwi Nori fall past him. Then he falls himself. He dies before Leto does, which is the mercy the book gives him, because Moneo wanted to put it down and finally did. Hwi's last words to Leto are 5 of them. She tells him she will go on ahead, and she calls him love. She has understood what is happening and understood there is nothing to be done, and she spends her final breath reassuring him. It is entirely consistent with everything IX specified, and it is entirely her own. Then the water takes him. Leto's death is one of the most physically unpleasant things Herbert ever wrote, and it goes on for a long time because the sandtrout that made him a god are millions of individually living animals, and water is poison to every one of them. His skin begins coming apart. The creatures tear themselves loose in agony and scatter. What had been the God Emperor of the known universe is dragged out of the river as a disintegrating ruin, shedding the thing that made him invulnerable, dying by pieces on the sand, and there is nothing dignified about any of it. Duncan finds Nayla and kills her in a rage over Hwi, which is the only response available to him and accomplishes nothing. And Leto lasts long enough to talk. Duncan and Siona come to him on the sand, and the conversation that follows is the closest thing the Dune sequence has to a summation. He does not plead. He does not accuse either of them of anything, which is remarkable given that both of them just killed him and one of them did it on purpose. He does not ask for forgiveness, and he very pointedly does not offer any, because forgiveness would imply that a transaction had gone wrong somewhere and nothing has gone wrong. He explains, he gives Siona the thing she was always owed, which is the reason spoken aloud by the person responsible rather than glimpsed sideways in a trance while dying of thirst. He confirms what she worked out in the desert, that she is what the whole program was for, and that everything descending from her carries it. He is, in that moment, handing over the only thing he has that is worth inheriting, and he is handing it to a woman who arranged his murder that morning and does not regret it. To Duncan, he gives something smaller and stranger, which is an acknowledgement. Duncan has spent this life, and by implication several thousand previous ones, being used as an instrument by a creature that would not explain itself. At the end, Leto explains himself, briefly, to the one man in the universe who knew the Atreides before any of this started, which is as close to an apology as either of them is built to manage. Then, the practical instructions. He tells them what is going to happen to the Empire now, which is that it ends. He tells them what to do about the spice, of which there is a finite quantity left and no further production. And he tells them what the creatures currently tearing themselves off his body are going to become. Because his death is also a seeding. The sandtrout scatter into the sand, and each one carries a fragment of him, a splinter of awareness that persists. Over the centuries, they will do what sandtrout do, which is encysst the water. And Arrakis will dry out again, and the desert will come back, and out of the sandtrout will come sandworms once more, and the spice cycle will restart. Every one of those worms will have a shard of Leto II inside it, dimly and endlessly aware, dreaming for as long as there are worms. He arranged his own afterlife, and what he arranged reads considerably more like a sentence than a reward. That is not an accident either. A man who spent 3,500 years insisting that the universe pay attention to consequences did not exempt himself at the end. What follows is exactly what he built it to be. The Empire comes apart without him, immediately and completely. The spice monopoly fails. The guild loses its supply and its grip. The fish speakers fragment. The administrative apparatus that held every human being alive in one arrangement stops existing, and there is nothing underneath it, because he spent 3,500 years making sure there would be nothing underneath it. The famine times arrive, and out of the famine comes the scattering. Humanity leaves. Not in an orderly imperial expansion, which is precisely the thing he was preventing. It bolts outward, in every direction at once, uncounted and untracked and unrecorded, past the edge of every map and out of the reach of every authority, in numbers no register could hold. The compressed spring of 3,500 years of enforced stillness releases all at once and throws the species across distances nobody will ever survey. Siona's descendants carry the invisibility outward with them, and it spreads through the gene pool exactly as designed. The thing he bought with his body is delivered on schedule, at the price he quoted himself when he was 9 years old. And it is worth being honest about what that delivery actually looks like, because the two novels that follow are not a victory lap. 1,500 years after the bridge, the remnant civilization that stayed behind has rebuilt something recognizable. And then the people who left start coming back. What returns out of the scattering is not a wiser humanity. It is factions nobody in the old empire has ever heard of, shaped by conditions nobody witnessed, and some of them are considerably worse than anything Leto ever ruled. They arrive with technologies and social arrangements that the Bene Gesserit, who have spent their entire existence being the most sophisticated players in human politics, find genuinely alarming. Crucially, some of them are running from something. The last two books are full of the strong suggestion that out there in the unmapped dark, the hunt Leto foresaw is real and has begun, and that the reason the scattering is folding back inward is that parts of it have met the thing he saw coming, which means the golden path worked exactly as specified and not 1 inch further. Leto did not promise a good future. He never once claimed the species would use its survival wisely, and nothing in his journals suggests he expected it to. He promised that humanity would still be here, dispersed past counting and impossible to find in a single glance when the hunters arrived. That is the entire product. It is not salvation, it is not paradise, and it is not even peace. It is a species that cannot be exterminated in one operation. He spent 3,500 years, his body, his mind, and every person he ever loved, to buy the human race a permanent inability to be cornered. Nothing else. He was completely clear about this, and everyone who begged him for something more generous was asking a question he had already answered. 1,500 years later, Archaeologists digging on the planet, by then called Arrakis, open a hidden chamber at a place called Dar Espalat and find a store of Ixian recording devices, and inside them the private journals of the God Emperor, dictated across millennia in his own voice, which is how any of this is known at all, and it is worth stopping on, because it reframes the entire book. Everything in those 500 pages, every argument, every justification, every appalling decision survives because Leto insisted on recording it and then hid it where it would be dug up by people he would never meet and could not influence. He was not writing for his court. He was not writing a defense to be read by anyone who could have been hurt or helped by it. He wrote an explanation, sealed it, and buried it for 15 centuries, to be opened long after the last person with a stake in the outcome was dust. That is the loneliest act in the novel, and it is the one that tells you what he actually wanted. He could compel obedience from every human being alive. He could not obtain a single person who understood him, and he knew it, because understanding was one of the things he had abolished on purpose. Moneo came closest and was broken by it. Tuono was shown the whole thing and came back still wanting him dead. Hwi loved him without ever being able to see what he saw. So he wrote it all down for strangers in a future he had personally arranged to be unable to see, which is as close to faith as a man with continuous knowledge of the future can get. So, the question this whole thing was built around: he saw the bridge coming, he had the woman he loved on the cart beside him, he personally issued the order that made the assassination possible, personally bred the woman who gave it, and personally moved the wedding to the village where she was waiting. Why build it that way? The answer is the argument Herbert spent 6 novels constructing, and it is not complicated once it is stated plainly. Leto was right. Everything he claimed was true and is verified inside the book. The threat was real, the golden path worked, the species survived because of what he did. And it was still intolerable, and it still had to end. And it had to end in a way that could never be mistaken for anything else. If he had simply died, humanity would have mourned a god and waited for the next one. Herbert had watched readers do exactly that with Paul. Come away from the first novel having enjoyed the rise of a messiah and missed the warning entirely, and he wrote 2 more books trying to get the point across. So the 4th one takes the argument to the only place left to take it. Do not test the idea on a leader who is wrong. Anyone can see through a leader who is wrong. Test it on one who is genuinely, demonstrably, verifiably right, and then show that it does not matter. A being that must be obeyed, absolutely, is unbearable, regardless of whether it happens to be correct. That is the lesson. And Leto did not want it argued, he wanted it installed, somewhere deeper than opinion, where a species keeps the things it learned the hard way. So he made himself the most complete demonstration of absolute power that had ever existed, ran it for 3,500 years until every human being alive was sick of it in their bones, and then had his own descendants kill him at the end of a road he built, using a soldier he assigned for reasons he had bred into them. He did not just save humanity, he made certain that nothing like himself could ever be assembled again, and then he made sure the species would remember why it should never want one. The desert came back, the worms came back, and every one of them carries a piece of a man who spent 35 centuries as the most powerful thing in the universe, and used all of it, in the end, to make himself impossible to repeat.